So yes, as I told, I'm going to talk about recovering short generator in principal ideals, so in cyclotomic rings in particular, which is your favorite ring if you're a cryptographer. So if you're not a cryptographer, probably your favorite ring is the circular convolution ring. So you know it's r to the x quotiented by x to the d minus 1, because in that ring you have this very nice FFT. So it turns out that because you can factor this polynomial over the integer, it's not a perfect ring for cryptography. So we take the next thing, which is cyclotomic rings, which are pretty much the same thing. So there's no need to be too afraid of all those complicated words. Basically, all we're doing is we're doing FFT, but we're just speaking of it as mathematicians would do. So. I mean, a year and a half ago, I would not have used this kind of wording, but no, I just mean it's like it's not as hard as it sounds. So this is joint work with Ronald Kramer, Chris Peikert, and Oded Regev. So why did we got interested into that problem? Well, because it was used in a few crypto systems. So in a fully homomorphic encryption scheme. So it was trying to improve on the first scheme. So it's basically the second fully homomorphic encryption scheme built. So here we didn't really know what was exactly needed, how to reduce it to the problem we know. So we're basically a bit playing around, and we were using those assumptions that are not exactly the standard assumption for lattice-based cryptography. And more recently, we've also used those to try to build multilinear maps. So for multilinear maps, the reason is like we just have no idea how to do this based on standard assumptions. So some people try to use this kind of special lattices to build multilinear maps. So what's the problem? So you have a secret key, which is a sort generator of an ideal in some ring R. And this is used as the private key. So here you'd say, well, that's just ideal lattices, cryptography based on ideal lattices. But the thing is, cryptography based on ideal lattices, actually, when you look at ring LWE, you don't have an ideal. You have a module of possibly rank 2 over a ring. So it's, instead of being generated by one element, it's generated by a 2 by 2 matrix, or a 2 by something matrix. So here we're in the case where basically the lattice that we're trying to tackle is generated just by one element of the ring, okay? And that actually makes the whole difference. And also this ideal is special, it's principal. So it means that it is generated by one element. Because in those rings you can also have ideals, even if they're of rank 1, they still need two elements to be fully generated. So those ideals are kind of special, okay? And as a public key, so we're not going to give a generator as a public key, we're just going to give a Z basis of that ideal. So now we're just giving generators, but to generate the whole ring, you just need a lot of those elements. And this serves as a public key. So for example, if you want to make sure that you're not revealing any special information about the ideal, one way of doing this is to use the Hermite normal form. So basically when you reveal the Hermite normal form of a lattice, this is a normal form. So basically it only depends on the lattice, not on how you generated it. Okay? So if we want to cryptanalyze such crypto system, well, so for the multilinear maps there have been other kind of attacks that don't necessarily recover the key, but that are sufficient to break them. But let's say that we're given the public key, we just want to recover the secret key. Mathematically, it's a very simple problem to express. We're going to do this in 2 steps. So the first step is classically called the principal ideal problem. So you're given such a principal ideal. So you have the promise that a generator G exists, and you want to recover a generator. But the thing is, like those rings, they don't have just one generator. They admit a lot of generator. This is because those cyclotomic ring, they admit a lot of units. Okay? So if you multiply a generator by a unit, you still get a generator. Okay, so that's our first task. We're given a Z basis of the ideal, and we want to recover an arbitrary generator. And the second task, the sort generator problem. So now we are given, so we've solved the first task, so we use that output, and that's our new input. And now we're given an arbitrary generator what to recover the one that is short. Because the one that is long here cannot be used as a secret key. That's not enough to do anything useful. Okay? So that's the second task. Recover either G, either something that's equivalently short. For example, if you multiply G by a root of unity, you get something of the same size, and we consider this as basically recover the secret key. Okay, so what is known, what is said about those two steps? So the first one actually is not an exponentially hard problem. We know sub-exponential algorithms for this task. Those are very recent, but they're based on old ideas. Essentially, before very recently, mathematicians were more interested into solving this kind of problem in very little dimension, but with very large discriminant, which still makes the problem hard, and they developed sub-exponential algorithm for that. And recently, those algorithms have been extended to the large dimension case. So here the algorithm becomes quite interesting because you have to balance a lattice reduction step and then a problem that looks more like index calculus. So, you know, basically this algorithm mix ideas of lattice cryptanalysis, but also factoring cryptanalysis or discrete log cryptanalysis. So maybe for your white paper, this algorithm is science fiction, as I've been told, I think, by some expert of the field. So it's like, we know this algorithm is sub-exponential. Well, there's some heuristic in there, but I mean, we're pretty much convinced. But it has never been implemented, except in dimension 1, basically. So if you can run this algorithm in dimension 8, 16, that's already something. So it would be nice to see how those algorithms actually perform. Yes?
Do you have a rough idea about the constants involved?
That's the other question. Those two questions kind of go together. I have absolutely no idea. So my feeling is that the factoring-like step has a large constant, but the lattice step has a small constant. And it's not like you put one after the other, you know, one play with the other. So I just, I have no idea. So it's a good idea to determine this. Also, you know, if you do it naively, you might arrive to some constant, but then you can also play with subfields, you know, because there are those Gentry-Sislow algorithms, so maybe you can solve it in the real subfield and then climb back up there. But maybe all this is a bit too algebraic for now. Okay. The second step, so my slides are a few weeks old, so I said progress toward quantum algorithms, so now it's actually an accepted result. So this has been published at, this is going to be published at SODA. So Biase is long have a provable polynomial time quantum algorithm for this task. Okay. So is that so much of a bad news? Well, you could think, well, but then you have to recover a short one out of this. And when you look at it, I mean, it's a classical technique in number theory. You can actually reduce this problem, so that's a bit strange, not to a short vector problem, but to a closed vector problem in what we will call the unit log lattice. So I will explain how it comes later. So it's a CVP problem, and that's probably going to be hard, right? But this lattice is a fixed lattice, okay? And a second point that was made by a few person is that actually, so in the worst case, that would be a CVP, but for the instances we're interested in cryptography, this problem is going to become a BDD, so bounded distance decoding. And then there was this enigmatic paper from the British Secret Services that announced that this problem is actually easy. It should be solved in polynomial time. In those cases, in the cyclotomic case, m is a power of 2. And they just didn't have the proof, they claimed it was true. But I mean, you can easily run the experiment. Oh, yes. You can easily run the experiment, and Schenk from N2 Innovation actually published the code to do so, but you can also do it yourself in Sage. And actually, it works. So that begs the question, why? So this is what we focus in this work. We focus on this second step, and we prove that it can actually be solved in classical polynomial time for those cryptanalytic instances. And not only when R is a power of 2, but also when the ring has degree of power of 2, but also when it has as a degree the power of a prime. I would suspect that this could be extended a little bit if you have a few composite factors, but this starts raising a lot of non-trivial questions in algebra and problems that where we have conjecture but actually no real fact established. Okay, so let me first start with explaining the tools that we're going to use. So then the second step is going to be a geometric study of those units, those cyclotomic units that are at the core of all this. And the last step is basically going to be a probabilistic argument that we're going to fall in the right region for all this to work. Okay. So the logarithmic embedding. So as I told you, we let K be a number field, and it has degree n, and it has embeddings. So that's just the FFT coefficient. Okay, the embeddings are just evaluating those polynomials at the roots of unity, or the primitive roots of unity, because in the cyclotomic case, if we're not in the cyclotomic case, then it's all the roots of unity. But that's basically the only difference between the cyclotomic and the non-cyclotomic one. Okay, so we're going to evaluate our polynomial x at all those roots of unity. So that's what we do with sigma 1 of x up to sigma n of x. And we're going to take the absolute value, and we're going to take the log of this, and we're going to make a huge vector out of this. So what's happening? Why are we doing this? So because those are called embeddings because they preserve the field structure. So in particular, they're multiplicative morphism. If we those preserve multiplication, and then the absolute value also preserve multiplication, and that's the magic of the log. It maps a multiplicative group to an additive one. So basically, this big log, so log with a capital L, it induces a group morphism from this field K, where you remove 0 or it goes to infinity, to a vector space. Okay, and if you restrict it to the ring of integer of this number field, so the field is not discrete. It has points everywhere. Okay, that's a field defined by extending the rationals. But if you restrict it to the integers, then you still get a structure preservation. It's now just a monoid morphism. Why? Well, because the multiplicative group of this ring is just a monoid. Okay, so now what are the units? So we know them as such. So R times it's a multiplicative group of units of R. So that's the set of all the elements of R that are invertible. Okay, and this is a group. So now you can define lambda as a logarithm of this group, and because this is a group, lambda is going to be a group. But it's not going to. So it's a group inside a vector space. Okay, and it's not only a group; it's actually going to be a lattice. So it means that it is discrete. Okay, and the Dirichlet unit theorem tells us a few things. So the kernel of this embedding log is actually a cyclic group, and that's the group of roots of unity. So basically it means that if you map everything through the log, you're not going to lose too much information. The only information you lose is just like multiplication by a root of unity, and we don't really mind losing that information. Okay? And the second point is that lambda is a lattice, and we know its rank. So it's a subtle combination of the real embeddings and the complex embeddings. It doesn't matter that much. So why does this lattice matter for our problem? Well, because two elements G and H are going to generate the same ideal if and only if they differ multiplicatively by a unit. Okay, if one is equal to the other times the units, they generate exactly the same ideal, and this is an if and only if statement. Okay, so basically, if we start from a generator H and are looking for a better generator G, and we map all this to the logarithmic embedding, then we're going to have that what we're looking for belongs to a coset of this log unit lattice. So basically we're allowed to start from this point h, log of h, sorry. We're allowed to move along this log unit lattice and obtain our new element. So now the question is like, yes, okay, algebraically all this works, but why does this help in finding the shortest one? Because does the log really preserve notion of norm, distances, etc.? It's something that deforms a lot. So that's actually a good question. It's you have to go through the details to make sure that everything works fine. So, for example, when we say that G is the smallest, you have to understand it in a relative sense, because, for example, if you take the algebraic norm of all those elements, or the volume that they generate, they're all the same. So basically being short for a generator doesn't exactly mean that all its coefficients are short. It more means that the ratio between its coefficients is small. Okay, it means that it's basically well equilibrated. Huh?
Do you really need a smallest generator to break the cryptosystems, or is a small enough?
Small enough would be enough. Yes. Okay. Yes.
It's not so clear whether you actually get the smallest one.
Huh?
Is it clear that you get the smallest?
So that's the thing, because here we have a BDD instance, we're actually going to get the smallest one. And this is also why we don't have to care so much about this notion of smallness. Is like, because we're in the BDD case. I mean, you start with a ball, okay. Now you deform it to something that's not exactly a ball, but that's kind of okay. So this is basically why this problem of finding a short generator is actually pretty much a CVP problem. But the thing is, it's a CV problem not in a random lattice, or it's in an arbitrary lattice. It's a problem in a very specific lattice, lambda. So all the question is like, how good of a basis can we get for lambda? Okay, so we could start with an arbitrary basis, apply lattice reduction to it, etc. But that wouldn't get us to solve this problem efficiently. But the thing is, because this lattice comes from very special structure, maybe we can directly write down a very good basis of it. So let's do a little bit of, I called it algebraic gymnastics. So here we're going to take this simple example into dimension. Okay, so we're starting with this ring, this z of square root of 2, and the two embeddings are given by those formula. So on the x-axis, we're gonna draw. Sorry, the x-axis corresponds to this formula, so a plus b square root of 2, and the y-axis is a minus b square root of 2. Okay, so here we're in the Galois case. So actually, this explains why there is a symmetry. Okay, because there is this field is Galois, so you can send one embedding to the other. Okay, so basically it means that you can swap the x and y axes, and you would still get the same thing. Okay. Also, because those things are embeddings, we not only have component-wise addition, we also have component-wise multiplication. Okay, so as I told you, there's a symmetry group induced by the Galois group. So the multiplication by -1 is like true for all lattices, but the conjugation here gives you another symmetry. Okay, but what we're going to study this lattice in a different way than we study lattices usually. So what we really matter here, so we're starting from a point, okay, and this point has an algebraic norm. So the algebraic norm is just the product of all its coordinates, okay. It defines basically the volume of the lattice it generates, okay. And beyond all those points, there are points that are quite special. I call them orthogonal elements. So it's 1, 2, but also square root of 2, -1, or minus square root of 2. So why do I call them orthogonal? Because if you multiply by such an element, in this representation, the action of this multiplication is just going to be a rotation and a scaling, okay? They do not distort space. Whereas if you take, for example, this point, it's going to distort space. It's going to stretch things down one way and expand it then up, okay? And in all this, the units are elements that preserves the volume. So, for example, that's element that would scratch by a factor x in that direction and expand by a factor x in the other direction. So those units they lie exactly on those hyperbolas. Okay. So now you may understand why the notion of smallest is kind of relative, because, for example, if I start from this point and I want to find another generator, I can only move along this isonorm curve. Okay, I can only move along those hyperbolas. And when we want to find a short generator, we're not trying to bring it back close to the origin. We're trying to bring them back close to those orthogonal elements. Okay, that's what it means to try to find a short generator. Okay, so now let's go to the logarithmic embedding. That's where things get nice. Okay, you remember that I told you that this logarithmic embedding was a ring morphism. So if I take all those points, I map that here. Here I should obtain a monoid. So this monoid even contains a 0. And now if you take any 2 points in this set, you're going to still stay in this set. Okay, but that's not a group anymore. Right? You cannot subtract. But now if you restrict it to the set of units, okay, you get this very nice straight line. And the points that are here, they form a lattice. So if you restrict it to the units, you actually get a group. And also, if you now take the intersection of one of those orange lines, okay, with the blue points, then what you obtain is always a finite copy, shifted copies of the original red line. So that's this red line, the points on the red line, I call the log unit lattice. Okay, so all those lines, they're copies of they're finitely many copies of the log unit lattice. For example, here there are 2 copies. Okay, there are two times this lattice on this line. And sometimes also it can happen that it is empty. For example, in that ring, there is no element of algebraic norm 3. Okay. So what do we want to do? Fundamentally, we say that we wanted to reduce things and bring them back as close as possible to being orthogonal. And if we see this in the log unit lattice, that just corresponds to reducing modulo the lattice. So we start from points that are in those gray areas here, and we just shift them by the lattice point to bring them back in the fundamental domain. Okay? And now we understand this question back into the original embedding, and that means that when we've done this, we've moved along the orange curves, so the isonorm curves, to bring it back into this cone. Okay? So we're not going to bring it back any closer to the origin, but we're just going to bring it closer to being orthogonal. Okay? But this notion of reduction depends on what fundamental domain I choose for my lattice here. So in dimension 1, there's an obvious fundamental domain to choose. Okay, you just choose half of your short vector on each side. But in more dimension, you have much more fundamental to choose from. So to show this, I mean, you can just shift the fundamental domain, and you see that it affects the cone. And the further away you get from the origin here for your fundamental domain, well, the further away your cones get from orthogonal elements here. So also this, be careful that if I keep on moving up to infinity on this log embedding, what's going to happen here is that the cone are going to get, the angles are going to get smaller and smaller. Huh? Or you cannot, because you cannot fit infinitely of them, so you basically have to compress at some point. So now the question is, like, we want to do this algorithmically. It's nice to view mathematically that there is a fundamental domain, a cone, etc. But how do you do this algorithmically? So you need an efficient algorithm to reduce, to to reduce modulo fundamental domain. And there is a very simple algorithm for this. So there are much more fancy algorithms for this, but this one has a nice property that it is very, very easy to study in the sense that you can express its correctness very simply. So I'm going to go over it. So this is called the Rundorf algorithm. So actually, Lenstra wrote down this algorithm before Babai, but it's called the common sense algorithm. Sorry, I'm not sure we should attribute it to anyone. So you want to reduce modular lattice. What you're going to do is you have a target T. You're going to multiply by the inverse of the matrix or the dual matrix or the transpose of the dual matrix. You're going to round each coordinate, okay, and remultiply by your matrix, and then you separate your error from your lattice point, and you return. You're supposed to return V and E. Sorry, not T and E. And we want to use this as a decoding algorithm. So it means that we get this BDD instance and we want to recover the lattice point. So this algorithm is going to be correct exactly when this error E has scalar product between -1/2 and 1/2 with each of the dual vectors of B. Okay. Just more pictures. How does this algorithm work? It's very simple. It's just like, oh, I know a lattice where this problem is simple, Zn, so let's just move back to this lattice, just round everything up, and then move back to the lattice I'm interested in. So here we see that the quality of the basis that we have is very important, because the more skewed your basis here, the more skewed you're going to have, your fundamental domain is going to be. And we saw before that we want a very good fundamental domain. Okay, so that's going to be our strategy to prove this claim that there is a fast algorithm to recover short generator. So we need 3 steps. So first we need to construct a basis of the log unit lattice. Then we need to prove that this basis is good. And finally, we're going to need to prove that also what we want to correct is actually a small error. Okay? So if we take E equal log of G, which is what the error we want to recover, that's actually small enough so that the bound I just showed before are going to be verified. So for the first task, actually we don't have anything to do because a basis for this lattice, or there is a small conjecture here. So let's say that we know a very good, a very simple set of independent points in that lattice, but we're not exactly sure that it generates all the lattice. So that's a conjecture. That's related also to the size of the class group, of the real subfield, blah, blah. I mean, this is very interesting, but maybe out of the scope of this talk. And this set of canonical units is given by the ratio of 1 minus zeta j's over 1 minus zeta. Okay? So that's our basis. We're going to take the log of all those guys, and that's our basis. And we want to prove that it is good. So that's our technical contribution. We estimate those bounds using analytic tools, actually. So that's where I got a little surprised. And the second step is to bound this error G, and that's not exactly trivial because taking the logarithm of a distribution is not so nice. So you have to use a little bit of probability theory to achieve this. Okay. So the cyclotomic units. So because those BJ were a bit painful, we're going to move to a simpler element. So we're going to take Zj equal to 1 minus zeta j. Okay. And so now we can simply express the Bj that we're interested by this ratio. Okay, and if we set the set of Bj plus the root of unity, zeta, then this group is known as the group of cyclotomic units. So here the mathematicians are sometimes a bit annoying with their terminology because it doesn't mean that this is the full group of units of the cyclotomic number field. But it is conjectured to be, okay? So, so that's this assumption. So we're going to make this first simplification. We're just going to say, oh, okay, we're just going to believe that this group of units is just all the units. It's conjectured to be the case. It's been verified up to, I think, m equal 1024. When m is a power of 2. It's also conjectured more generally that this number is actually very small. Even if you take a prime m up to 150, I think the largest value we've ever found is 3. So if it's not larger than polynomial, then our claim still holds. We're going to make a second assumption for this talk. Instead of studying the BJ, as I told you, we're going to study a very closely related matrix, the matrix given by the Z. So we're going to take the log of those elements, and we're going to study this matrix. Okay. So when I get to study a matrix, usually the first thing I do is to plot it. So this is how it is defined. So remember that we're going to take the log of those guys and the DJ as this. So what are the embeddings? The embeddings are given simply by sending the formal root of unity zeta to like a legitimate complex root of the unity. Okay, so omega is a concrete root of unity in the complex, and we can send zeta to any of those guys where E is an invertible element mod M. Okay, so we plot it and we get this nice matrix, which is a bit something is going on definitely, but maybe I've been a bit naive because here I've indexed using, so I'm only having indexes that are invertible mod M, so maybe I thought I just order them like this, but that's pretty naive. What you want to do is, because this is a group, you probably want to organize your matrix according to the structure of this group. So instead we're going to use the multiplicative indexing, so we're going to index it according to 3 to the 0, 3 to the 1, 3 to the 2. And suddenly we realize that this matrix is very, very structured. Okay, so from the formula you can also directly recognize this. But what's the point? The point is that when a matrix is structured, you can get a lot of information much easier about it. So as I told you, the entries of this matrix have this form, and this only depend on the project ij. So we call this matrix G circulant for the multiplicative group Z of M times, and we're also quotient by plus minus 1 because of the absolute value basically. Okay, and so what can we know about this matrix? Well, we just because it is circulant, it's going to be much easier to compute properties of its dual. So this is we can summarize this as this. So when a matrix is circulant, you can compute its eigenvalues very easily using the character group. So that's basically the dual group of the group G. Okay, so again, that looks fancy. That's just FFT, huh? Because when a matrix is circulant, you can associate it with a convolution ring. So you're basically here we're just computing the FFT coefficient of the first vector of this matrix. But that's how mathematicians speak about it. So and it's going to be useful to speak about it that way very soon. So K is a character, so that's a multiplicative morphism from the group G to the complex. And then your eigenvalues are given by this formula. Lambda equals the sum of the G's coefficient of the first line times the conjugate of the character at G. And also, if the matrix is circulant, you know that its dual will all have the same norm, and you can compute the norm of this dual as the sum of all the inverses of the square inverses of those eigenvalues. So that's our task. What we want to compute in the end is those norms. We want to prove that this value is not too large. Okay? So then we're going to start to do a bit more analytical number theory. So those characters of G, so G is that group, we're going to extend them to all the integers by simply, we're going to set them to 0 when they're not supposed to be defined, okay? So, okay, so this is what we want to compute. And, you know, when you never really saw this kind of stuff, you might be stuck here for a while. So maybe you say, oh, maybe I just stop here. So you put this formula into a numerical tool, and you actually can verify that this algorithm should work. It's not exactly satisfying, right? So there might be something cute to be done. So maybe if they don't very look algebraic to an educated eye, they appeared quite naturally, and actually mathematician really knows very well to deal with this equation. And this kind of computation exactly appear in this book of Washington, which is a very complete book on cyclotomic number fields. Okay, so how does it go? So he actually computes something very related to what we're doing. He's computing the volume of this log unit lattice. That's called the regulator of a number field. Okay, so basically he's computing the product of all those guys. He's not interested into them individually, he just wants to compute the product of all of them.
So what you are saying is you're building up celebs and then bye-bye is already enough.
Yes.
You are not
No,
even reducing.
No.
Okay, so you're just analyzing the lattice and that's it.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
No, that's so in the end, this lattice is very particular. It's more orthogonal than this lattice.
It's already reduced by.
It's more than reduced. I mean, if you try to reduce a random lattice to the best of your power, like you don't even care about running time, you will not get a basis as good.
Yeah.
So this lattice has a very, very special structure. But to prove this, you need to dig into interesting mathematics. So, okay, so that's what we want to prove. Let's get rid of this log because it's very annoying. So we're gonna just develop the Taylor series. So we're gonna get this sum, you know, with stuff running down to the infinite. Okay, so now we get this formula. Now we get a double sum. So have we really made any progress? I was not sure, but actually we do. So so we have a sum with this character, with this root of unity, and then we divide by k. I mean, we see that this kind of stuff are kind of turning around the circle of the complex number. Okay, and this guy as well. But this guy is turning multiplicatively when this guy is turning additively. That's kind of weird stuff. Huh? You said? That's a Gauss sum, you said?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. So very soon you realize that you were in known mathematics. That you know, those stuff are very well known. So you split the sum that way. So you put this k factor on the left, and then you just have this term here. And exactly as you say, this is a Gauss sum. So what you can do when you have a Gauss sum is you can separate it. Okay, it's separable. So you can express this in terms of just a character. Okay, and something that only depends on the character. Okay, sorry, something that's gonna have that's turned on the unit circle. Okay, so it's gonna have magnitude 1, and something that only depends on the character. Okay, and the size, the magnitude of this thing is actually gonna be square root of m when the character is primitive. So you have to do a bit more work when the characters are not primitive. But let's not focus on this for this talk. So we're just going to assume that all characters are primitive. So now we rewrite, and we have that the magnitude of what we are trying to compute is equal to square root of m times this sum. So his sum, again, if you're not a mathematician, this looks very enigmatic. But if you're a mathematician, well, if you replace the top term just by 1, okay, if you forget that it rotates on the unit circle, then you get something that diverges. And actually, you're not that much afraid that it diverges, you're more afraid that it collapses to 0, okay? So what's going on? Actually, this is all, well, very known. It's called a Dirichlet L series, okay? And for example, if this function, you replace the character by 1, if you take the trivial character, then you get the Riemann zeta function. So actually, this whole question is related to a question of analytical number theory. So we wanted to lower bound this. We've expressed it in terms of an L function, and those L function has been very thoroughly studied, since the beginning of the 19th century. So we have this theorem from Landau, who says that for any non-quadratic primitive Dirichlet character, then we have those bounds. So basically, the L function evaluated at 1 on any of those characters is essentially going to be contained in 1 over log n and log n. Okay, so actually we know very well how to control those L bonds. The gap between the lower bound is small. Lower bound and the higher bound is not that large. And the GRH hypothesis is very related to this kind of question. So, for example, you can get much tighter bound on this if you assume GRH. Also, we've made the assumption that the characters are non-quadratic. Again, I'm not going to dig too much into this, but actually, there are going to be a few, like always at most 3 non-quadratic characters in that sum, but because there are not too many, it's not too much of a hassle. Okay, so if we basically plug all this together, we obtain what we want to obtain. So we have a bound on the dual matrix that we are interested in. So if M is the power of a prime, and if we let B be the logarithm of this canonical basis of the cyclotomic unit, then we're going to have that all the dual vectors have the same norm, and this norm is upper bounded as follows. So here I forgot to remove GRH because this is an old version of those slides. You can forget about GRH, it's not necessary here. Okay, so here we have that, well, if we forget about the log factor, basically that those terms are bounded by 1 over square root n. So that's it. We've proven that this basis has a pretty good geometry. Okay, it's almost orthogonal. So now we just need to do some effort also for proving that that the error that we're trying to decode somehow is going to be in the range of decodability given by this basis. Okay, so this was given to us. This we proved using analytical number theory, and this we're going to quickly sketch a proof using. Well, I'm not going to go into the detail. I'm just going to make a proof that doesn't work and tell you that there is a proof that works. So, again, that's a strange thing about taking the log, is that actually you don't really mind how big the coefficients are. Okay, so for example, if you assume that all the embeddings have the same distribution and are independent, you can actually scale up and down this distribution, and this is not going to change the problem. If you remember, I drew a cone as our fundamental domain that we want to reduce. So if I scale up or scale down, that's not going to change anything. Okay, if I scale a point, it's going to stay in the cone. Okay, so basically it means that in another sense, I had this beam on the log embedding. It means that when I multiply the distribution by a scalar s and take the log, I'm just going to have a shifted version of my distribution. So I'm going to have the log of my distribution that's going to be shifted by something that goes in the direction of 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay, this axis that was orthogonal to the log unit lattice. Okay, and because this is orthogonal to the log unit lattice, if I move along this line, I'm not going to change the way it behaves when I reduce modulo the lattice. Okay, so if we do this, the nice thing is that we can simply assume that the average of our distribution, when we take the log of it, is at 0. We can assume it's centered in 0. Okay, so now we let E be the log of this distribution, and we're going to assume that it is square summable. Okay, we're going to assume that it has a variance. Huh? Okay, I'm just 3 minutes. Okay, so then we can compute the variance of any of its scalar product with anything, and if we apply the bound, then we get that it is less than 1/2 with probability smaller of 1. But here I'm cheating you because I need to apply this to all I at the same time, and I cannot apply with the probability. This probability is not close enough to. It's not close enough to 0, so I can apply the union dot. So we need more tools to do this. So that comes from sub-exponential variable, random variable theory. But if you plug all this together, what you obtain in the end, if you assume that G follows a continuous Gaussian. So here again, I'm cheating a little bit because I'm supposed to be in a discrete set. But then you take the log of G. Then we're going to have these properties that make the algorithm work. And actually, you can extend this to the real discrete normal distribution, but you lose a little bit here. But I really think that's just an artifact of the proof. Okay, so that's what Shintani domain looks like. So that's when you take the image back from the logarithm embedding of this fundamental domain that some mathematicians like to draw them. So you have to view this as a cone. Also, I presented the result for cryptanalytic case, so that's somehow an average case. But in the next version of our paper, we also present a more general result in the worst case, where here you don't find the shortest generator, but you find in polynomial time a sub-exponential approximation of it. Okay, because this lattices has a so nice geometric property, you can basically, instead of solving BDD, you're going to approximate CVP, and you have to randomize it a little bit to make it work in the worst case. But you can obtain in polynomial time sub-exponential factors. So that's also something that we really don't know how to do for general lattices when they're not principal or we're in the ring LW case. So basically, those principal ideals are a very bad idea to build crypto systems upon.
So that means quantumly they are completely dead. Yeah? Because both sets are
okay.
Why not?
No, but you only get a sub. So that's for principal ideals, not general.
Sure.
And you only get an approximation factor that's 2 to the square root n. So you don't get polynomial approximation factor.
But the new Soda paper gives you, I mean, the first step is polynomial time.
Yes,
yours?
the second step is polynomial time, but the quality of the results is not polynomial approximation factor. It's sub-exponential approximation factor, which is already surprising. I mean, it is. If you apply regular lattice reduction, it's not what you're supposed to get.
And this sub-exponential approximation is not good enough to predict the schemes.
You have to dig into the details of each of those schemes. But I mean, for the FHE scheme, we have alternatives that use much, approved assumption. So we should move to this. And the multi-node maps have suffered all other kinds of attack. So. That are way simpler than this.
Question? No? Thank you very much.
No standard question?
My standard question for the web.
Oh yes, so there's the PIP thing. So I think here. I mean,
implementation.
So I think first the implementation, second, as Martin asked, the constant, and also I mean, can we push it under to L to the 2/3? Because I mean, why not? We were stuck for factorization. We were stuck at 1/2, and suddenly NFS came up. So can you invent the new NFS for factoring in number fields of many dimension? That's
Great. So, thank you very much.